Right now you feel the pressure of bills, but by the time you close your eyes tonight, you can feel the quiet certainty of one who already possesses it all. There is a moment in your inner life where the future stops feeling distant and begins to settle inside you as something intimate, something already unfolding, something that recognizes you as its natural home. This moment is not loud. It does not announce itself with fireworks or sudden clarity. It comes quietly, almost shyly, the way dawn appears before anyone realizes the night is over. And in that softness, you begin to understand what Neville meant when he said that you must think from the end, not toward it, not about it, not in anticipation of it, but from it, as though the state you desire has already wrapped itself around your being. Feel how different that is. Feel how the tension you usually hold in your chest begins to loosen when you no longer treat your dream as something far ahead of you, but something breathing with you in this moment. Perhaps you've spent years imagining a wealthier life through the lens of distance. You picture yourself 5 years from now, 10 years from now, finally relieved, finally free from the weight that presses against your ribs today. But every time you place your dream in the future, you unknowingly confess that you are not yet the person who lives it, and your subconscious listens to that confession far more closely than to your words. This is why results feel slow, why change feels fragile, why the world seems to echo the past instead of the possibility. You are not failing. You are simply observing life from the outside of the state instead of standing inside it and letting the world rearrange to match your inner posture. Let your breath deepen gently as these words sink in. When you think from the end, time ceases to be a barrier. You no longer wait for 5 years of effort, strategy, or luck. You no longer measure progress by external evidence. Instead, you measure by naturalness, the ease with which you can feel yourself already being what you want to be. This inner naturalness is the real bridge between your current circumstances and the reality you long for. Not action, not striving, not even hope. Naturalness, the quiet acceptance that the future has already occurred in you and the world is merely catching up. Notice how your body shifts when you imagine that your wealth is not something you achieve, but something you inhabit. Perhaps your shoulders lower. Perhaps your breathing expands. Perhaps an inner tension you carry daily begins to melt just a little. This is the beginning of the end, becoming the present. This is the beginning of you stepping into the identity of someone who no longer waits, someone who no longer negotiates with fear, someone who understands that the state of wealth is not a reward, but a placement of consciousness. And when you stand in that state, your world can no longer mirror lack because you are no longer aligned with it. Thinking from the end is not pretending. It is not fantasy. It is the most spiritually honest act you can take, because the deeper laws of consciousness operate only in the now. The future is not created tomorrow. It is accepted now. It is felt now. It is assumed now. So feel the shift happening inside you as you listen. Feel the old urgency dissolving. Feel the old timeline collapsing. You don't need to wait. You don't need to chase. You only need to allow the state of your fulfilled desire to become more real to you than the evidence of the senses. When that happens, even gently, the world has no choice but to follow. And as you let this truth settle, remember that this chapter is not about forcing a new belief. It is about remembering a forgotten position of consciousness, a place where you have already arrived, a place where you stand today quietly, naturally, as the embodiment of your own fulfilled end. When you are ready, we will move into the next unfolding, the difference between acting and reacting. You may recognize the pull of the old self in those moments when something small goes wrong, and your entire body tightens as if history is repeating itself. When an unexpected expense arrives and your stomach drops. When someone's tone triggers an entire story about your worth. When plans fall through and you feel as though the universe is closing doors instead of opening them. These moments are not failures. They are invitations. Invitations to notice whether you are reacting from the old man or acting from the new one. Because reacting always pulls you backward. It binds you to the identity that you're trying to outgrow. Reacting strengthens the assumption that the world has power over you. Acting, on the other hand, is not physical action. Acting is internal authorship. It is the quiet decision to remain in the state you have chosen, even when the senses present evidence that contradicts it. Feel for a moment the quiet difference in your body when you imagine yourself responding from the state of your fulfilled desire rather than from fear or habit. A wealthy self does not collapse inward when a bill arrives. A secure self does not shrink from unexpected outcomes. A confident self does not interpret delay as denial. When you stand in the state of your chosen identity, your responses become aligned with that state, and your world begins to mirror it. This is why Neville emphasized the importance of putting off the old man and putting on the new, not as a metaphor, but as a method. If you continue to react in the old ways, you breathe life into the old assumptions. If you respond from the state you have claimed, you nourish the new reality. Let your awareness expand gently as you take this in. Acting from the new state is not about pretending everything is perfect. It is about refusing to let external noise determine your internal truth. It is the quiet refusal to bow to appearances. It is the steady inner voice that says, even when the evidence has not yet shifted, I remain who I have chosen to be. And with every moment you hold this inner posture, the old patterns weaken, the old timelines dissolve, the old identity loses its authority over you. You are not reacting to the world is beginning to react to you. Let yourself feel the weight of that revelation and the freedom inside it. You may have worked tirelessly, taken courses, changed strategies, switched jobs, pushed yourself harder, only to end up in the same emotional landscape again and again, the same anxiety around money, the same fear of losing progress, the same hesitation to trust your inner voice, and every time you find yourself back in that familiar place, a part of you wonders whether there is an invisible barrier keeping you from breaking through. But the barrier is not external. It is a state. A state you have unknowingly returned to because it feels familiar, even if it does not feel good. Neville's words reveal the heart of this phenomenon. Creation is finished. You are not creating outcomes through effort. You are tuning into existing possibilities through the state you occupy. And a state, when left untransformed, will inevitably bring forth the same events, the same emotions, the same outcomes. This is why people experience recurring hardship, recurring financial instability, recurring disappointment. It is not because life is against them. It is because the old concept of self has not yet died. And until it does, the world will continue to mirror it with precision. Notice what happens in your body as you hear this. There may be resistance. There may be a strange sense of relief. There may be a quiet grief for the version of you who tried so hard without realizing that it was the inner identity, not the outer effort, that needed to shift. Allow that awareness to expand. You are not being punished by repetition. You are being shown exactly where your freedom lies. All recurrence is a signal pointing to the state that needs to be released. All repetition is a doorway calling you to step into a new concept of self. And as you sit with this truth, feel how the idea of dying to the old self is not morbid or frightening. It is liberating. It is the shedding of an identity that has kept you tied to experiences you have outgrown. It is the gentle permission to stop living as the version of you who needed to survive, struggle, and hope. Recurrence only continues as long as you feed it with your attention, your fear, your assumption that this is just how life is. But the moment you withdraw your inner support, the cycle collapses. The moment you accept a higher state as your natural home, the old one dissolves like mist in sunlight. Let that idea settle gently in your body. Feel the soft unraveling it creates as you realize how many memories you've carried as proof that you cannot change, cannot succeed, cannot become the version of yourself you long to embody. Those memories were never fixed. They were never stronger than the imagination that created them. They continue to influence you only because you have not yet reclaimed them. And so, the old events repeat themselves by resonance, not by fate. The world mirrors the emotional residues you haven't dissolved. That is why the same patterns reappear. That is why the same fears return. That is why the same disappointments seem to follow you. It is not because life refuses to change. It is because your past still speaks louder than your future. Revision is the quiet act of reversing that imbalance. It is the subtle reordering of the inner structure from which your life emerges. When you revisit the events of your day, not to judge them, but to reshape them, you are cutting the roots of recurrence. You are removing the emotional charge that fuels the old identity. You are choosing a new meaning, a new outcome, a new assumption. And because consciousness is the only creative power, the revised scene becomes the real one. You are not pretending. You are selecting a version of the past, that aligns with the state you seek to inhabit, and in doing so, you release yourself from the narrative that once defined you. Feel how your breath changes as you consider this. Imagine looking back at a moment from earlier today that felt heavy, unfair, disappointing, or unsettling. Now imagine gently reshaping it, not by denying what happened, but by allowing your inner world to infuse it with a different outcome, a different emotional tone, a different meaning. Notice how your body responds. Notice how the old tension begins to evaporate. This is not fantasy. This is transformation. Neville called revision the pruning shears of the mind because it removes the branches that no longer bear fruit. And when you prune the past, you alter the entire growth of your future. The most extraordinary part is this: if the past can be restructured into a new present, then your future is already bending toward the identity you are choosing now. Nothing is locked. Nothing is final. Nothing is beyond revision. You are not shaped by what happened to you. You are shaped by the meaning you continue to give it. And when you reclaim that meaning, you reclaim your power. You reclaim your freedom. You reclaim the self that was always waiting beneath the weight of unexamined memories. You may not have noticed how often you think of your desire rather than from it. Thinking of wealth, of freedom, of success, of a peaceful life creates a subtle separation. It places your dream outside of you, as something to reach for, something that requires time, improvement, or extraordinary circumstances to become real. And each time you think of it, your body responds with the faint ache of lacking it. That ache, repeated day after day, becomes an assumption, and that assumption becomes your state. This is why you can visualize for hours yet still feel unchanged. The desire remains external, and the state you inhabit continues to echo the belief that you are not yet who you want to be. Notice now the gentle shift that occurs when you imagine stepping inside the identity of your fulfilled desire. When you allow yourself to think from the consciousness of someone who already is, already has, already lives the life that once felt distant. There is no longing in that state. There is no hurry, no fear of missing out, no quiet doubt asking when things will finally change. Instead, there is an unmistakable sense of inner completion, a grounded calm that arises when the mind and body agree on the same truth. This feeling is not forced. It is remembered. It is the natural resonance of your true self when you stop arguing with your desire. Let the awareness of this wash through you slowly. Thinking from the state is not about pretending or imagining hypothetically. It is surrender. It is allowing your love for the state to pull you into it completely. Neville often said that your assumption, when persisted in, hardens into fact. But he also said something far more intimate. You must abandon yourself to the state. Abandon not with desperation, but with devotion. Abandon the identity that kept you in waiting, in wishing, in hoping. Abandon the version of you that was always almost there. Step fully into the consciousness of the one who is already living the realization of the desire. Feel how your breath deepens when you consider living from your chosen identity instead of chasing it. Feel how your body softens when you imagine that the struggle is over, not because life suddenly cooperated, but because you finally stood where the outcome is already complete. In this state, decisions feel different, reactions dissolve, confidence arises naturally. You no longer measure progress by external events because you understand that all events flow from consciousness. You are no longer the seeker, you are the one who has become. And as this understanding anchors itself within you, notice how it reshapes the way you interpret your world. Small inconveniences lose their power to define you. Doubt becomes a passing shadow rather than a truth. Fear becomes a doorway rather than a wall. You begin to move through the world as someone who knows that everything unfolding around you is simply the reflection of the state you occupy. Thinking from the state becomes not a technique, but a home. A home you return to with every breath, every moment of awareness, every quiet remembrance that your desire is not separate from you. Feel how your breath moves through your body as you consider this shift. Controlled feeling is not suppression. It is not the denial of your human experience. It is the quiet choice to align with the emotional tone of the state you have chosen, even when old feelings rise as echoes of who you once believed yourself to be. When Neville said that feeling is the only medium through which ideas are conveyed to the subconscious, he was pointing to the foundational truth that your emotional atmosphere is the fertile soil of manifestation. The subconscious does not respond to words alone. It responds to the emotional posture beneath them. And so, when regret, fear, or disappointment arise, you are not being shown what is true. You are being shown what is familiar. Let that distinction soften the tension you may carry. The old emotions are not warnings. They are residues. They are reflections of past assumptions that are dissolving as you step into a higher state. And while you cannot control the first feeling that surfaces, you can choose the feeling you return to. You can choose the tone you nourish. You can choose the emotional signature of the identity you are embodying. This is controlled feeling. This is the inner mastery that allows your new state to stabilize, to mature, to take root. Notice what happens in your body when you imagine responding to life from emotional discipline rather than emotional reflex. A disciplined mind does not fight its feelings, it guides them. It understands that negative emotions are not failures, but invitations to reorient. It recognizes that the body bears the marks of repeated emotional patterns, and that changing those patterns is an act of both compassion and power. You are not trying to become emotionless. You are learning to inhabit the emotional atmosphere of your chosen state, even when the world presents reasons to return to the old one. Imagine for a moment the emotional tone of the version of you who already lives in wealth. Not the fantasy of wealth, but the feeling of someone for whom prosperity is natural. Notice how steady that version of you feels. Notice how unbothered, how centered, how calm. Wealth, in its deepest sense, is a frequency of sufficiency. It is not frantic. It is not desperate. It does not cling or fear loss. When you step into this emotional posture, even gently, even briefly, you begin to train your subconscious to accept this state as your new home. And as this emotional discipline becomes more familiar, even the external world begins to change in response. Situations that once overwhelmed you lose their power. Circumstances that once shook you no longer define you. You begin to see clearly that feelings are not obstacles, but instruments. They can elevate or restrict you depending on which ones you choose to hold. This is the quiet mastery that transforms states into realities. Let that instruction breathe through you gently. Denying the evidence of the senses does not mean rejecting reality or pretending that circumstances do not exist. It means recognizing that circumstances are effects, not causes. They are reflections, not truths. They are the delayed expression of an old state, and they have no authority over the state you are entering now. When Neville said that facts are the fruit of imaginal activity, he was pointing to a radical freedom hidden in plain sight. The world does not shape you. You shape the world through the assumptions you hold with feeling. And so, when the senses present something unwanted, what you are actually seeing is not who you are becoming, but who you once believed yourself to be. Feel the quiet relief inside that realization. It softens something deep in the body, releasing you from the urgency to react, to fix, to collapse into fear. The old facts lose their power when you no longer grant them meaning. You begin to understand that the world you see today is simply the echo of a previous state, and therefore it cannot define your future unless you allow it. This is what it means to deny the evidence of the senses. It is not resistance, it is transcendence. It is the conscious choice to place your loyalty in imagination rather than appearances, in inner truth rather than outer noise. Notice how the emotional posture of your desired state feels compared to the emotions triggered by circumstances. The state of wealth feels spacious, steady, unbothered. It holds a softness in the chest and a groundedness in the breath. The state of lack feels tight, contracted, urgent. When external facts try to pull you back into contraction, that is your invitation to return to the feeling of your chosen state. Not by force, but by remembrance. You breathe differently when you remember who you are. You think differently. You interpret events differently. And soon the old facts begin to dissolve because there is no longer a state to sustain them. Imagine for a moment that the evidence of the senses is like the final glow of a sunset. You do not panic when the sky turns red and gold, knowing that night is coming. You understand that what you see is simply the last expression of a cycle completing itself. In the same way, the circumstances in your life that reflect lack or limitation are the sunset of your old assumptions. They are fading. They are ending. They are clearing the space for the new state to take form. Your only task is to remain faithful to the inner light rising within you. Take a moment to feel how this lands in your body. You may notice a subtle stillness rising in your chest, or perhaps a sudden clarity moving through your mind. Your inner world has never been passive. Every fear you rehearsed was an expenditure. Every moment spent imagining worst-case scenarios was a deposit into states you did not want to occupy. And every time you allowed yourself to dwell in the feeling of possibility, expansion, or sufficiency, you were investing in a future already aligned with those emotions. Consciousness is never idle. It is always giving shape to the unseen, and the direction of that shaping depends on the quality of investment you make with your attention. Imagine now that you awaken tomorrow as the version of yourself who treats thoughts as valuables. Someone who does not casually indulge in lack because lack is too expensive. Someone who does not waste inner conversations on limitation because limitation yields no return. Someone who no longer pours energy into self-doubt because self-doubt produces nothing but more of itself. Feel how empowering that shift is, not as an idea, but as a lived internal posture. This is not discipline in the harsh sense. It is alignment. It is choosing not to squander the richness of your imagination on states that drain you. It is learning to invest only in what you desire to experience. When Neville said that assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled is an investment, he meant that every moment you dwell in your chosen state is a seed planted into the soil of consciousness. And because consciousness is the only creative medium, the seed must produce a harvest. The psychological now, this breath, this moment of awareness, is the only time that matters. When you feel yourself as already wealthy, not as fantasy, but as inner acceptance, you are placing the coin of heaven into the state of wealth. That state, nourished with consistent feeling, grows roots in you. It becomes familiar, it becomes natural, and eventually, it becomes unavoidable in your external world. Notice how your energy shifts when you think of your thoughts as investments rather than background noise. A subtle responsibility awakens, but it is not heavy. It is sacred. You begin to observe yourself from a higher vantage point. You see where you have been spending your inner currency without intention. You see where you can redirect it toward what nourishes you. And slowly the entire trajectory of your life begins to change, not because you forced anything, but because you invested in the consciousness that naturally expresses the reality you seek. Let yourself become aware of this in a gentle way. You may notice how, even on calm days, there is a subtle commentary running beneath your awareness, a doubt that whispers when you look at your financial situation, a worry that arises before you even open your email, a quiet voice that repeats an old narrative about your worth, your limitations, or your likelihood of success. These inner conversations were not chosen consciously, but they have been rehearsed so often that they now feel like truth. They shape the emotional tone of your mornings and the expectations you carry into your nights. And unless they are transformed, they continue to reinforce the very states you are trying to transcend. Feel for a moment how different your body becomes when you imagine shifting these conversations. Imagine that your inner speech match the identity you are now choosing to embody. Imagine that the thoughts running through your day were flavored with sufficiency, calm, certainty, and belonging. Imagine that your inner voice spoke as if the outcome were already guaranteed, as if the path before you were already clear, as if your desires were not distant possibilities, but present realities. Notice how your breath deepens with this idea. Notice how your chest expands. Your body recognizes the truth before your mind does. When your inner speech aligns with your chosen state, something remarkable happens. Outer circumstances begin to lose their power to destabilize you. You no longer spiral into old assumptions when a challenge appears. You no longer interpret delays as signs of failure. Your inner world becomes cohesive, unified, anchored in the emotional tone of the identity you are inhabiting. And because consciousness is always creating, this unified inner state begins to produce synchronicities, opportunities, and outcomes that reflect its truth. Neville taught that inner speech is a conversation with the infinite. Every sentence you repeat to yourself is a message sent into the deeper layers of your being. If your inner speech is saturated with fear, the subconscious responds with forms that match fear. If it is saturated with wealth, safety, and sufficiency, the subconscious responds with experiences aligned with those feelings. You do not need to speak out loud for this to be true. The silent dialogues within you carry the same creative weight. As you allow this awareness to settle, you may begin to notice fragments of familiar inner conversations rising to the surface. Not to shame you, but to be understood. Every limiting narrative that once protected you now reveals itself so it can be released. Every fearful expectation that once felt natural now shows you where the old identity still whispers. And with each moment of recognition, you gift yourself the chance to choose again. Let this understanding settle softly in your body. You may feel a quiet release, as though a long-held burden is loosening its hold. You no longer need to manage people, circumstances, or timelines with the urgency that once exhausted you. You no longer need to fight for control of events that were never meant to lead you. You are not here to mold the world with force. You are here to mold the self with awareness. And as that self transforms, the world naturally reorganizes around it. Neville spoke of this with unwavering clarity. There is no one to change but self. And this is not a restriction, it is liberation. It means you have always held the key. Perhaps you can feel how this truth rearranges your relationship with life. The situations that once felt personal no longer pierce you in the same way. The disappointments that once seemed like verdicts now reveal themselves as reflections of an old state you no longer occupy. The resistance you once felt towards certain people or circumstances softens, not because they have changed, but because you have. When your consciousness rises, the world cannot remain the same. It must dissolve and reform to match the new level of you. This is not metaphor, it is law. Notice how your breath deepens when you imagine stepping fully into the identity you have been cultivating throughout this journey. Imagine that your environment bends effortlessly to the frequency of your new state. Imagine that opportunities are drawn to you because they recognize your inner signature. Imagine that relationships improve, not through negotiation, but through vibrational alignment. Imagine that financial flow increases because you finally stopped doubting your belonging inside abundance. Feel how natural that feels when you let the old doubts fall away. The world is not separate from your consciousness. It is your consciousness expressed in form. When you stop trying to change the world directly, you free yourself from the exhausting cycle of effort and resistance. You begin to act from a place of quiet authority, knowing that your inner assumptions are the true architects of your experience. You become less reactive to appearances because you understand that appearances are only the footprints of former states. And as your new state stabilizes, through feeling, through inner speech, through devotion to the desired identity, the footprints must change. They have no choice. Life begins responding to you in ways that feel orchestrated, meaningful, and deeply aligned. Feel the empowerment in this awareness. Feel the clarity returning to your chest, the steadiness returning to your breath. Every chapter you have walked through in this journey was leading you here. The recognition that you are the source, the center, the point from which every manifestation flows. You do not need to chase change. You become it. And when you become it, the world reflects it effortlessly. There comes a quiet moment when the teachings you've absorbed stop feeling theoretical and begin to live inside you. The shift is subtle but unmistakable. You are no longer reaching for the millionaire state. You are thinking, breathing, and responding from it. The old tension softens. The old urgency dissolves. You sense a steadier identity taking shape, one that carries sufficiency rather than longing. What once felt like effort now feels like alignment. You understand instinctively that transformation unfolded not through force, but through the state you chose to inhabit. And in this calm awareness, you recognize that your external world is already rearranging itself to match the self you have finally allowed yourself to become. You are already living the state your heart once chased. Subscribe and live from your chosen state.